Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to dive right into the staggering scale of life on our planet and the really critical threats it's facing right now. Today, we're basically opening the pages of a chapter that details the true extent of our world's biological library. We'll be breaking down the whole concept of biodiversity and why conserving it is absolutely crucial.
I want you to picture this. Imagine a visitor from a distant galaxy stepping onto Earth for the very first time. What do you think would be the very first thing to just completely amaze and baffle them? Honestly, it probably wouldn't be our sprawling cities or our fancy technology. It would almost certainly be the unbelievable, staggering diversity of living organisms that we share this planet with.
To put that scale into perspective for just a second, consider this. Right now, there are over 300,000 species of beetles crawling around our planet. 300,000, just beetles.
And it definitely doesn't stop there. We share this world with more than 20,000 distinct species of ants, 28,000 species of fishes, and nearly 20,000 species of beautiful orchids. It's the kind of richness that literally never ceases to astonish biologists and everyday people alike.
So let's look at Section 1, the scale of life and Earth's species richness. What's really fascinating about all this immense variety is how incredibly unevenly it's distributed. Of all the recorded species globally, animals absolutely dominate the biosphere. They make up over 70% of the total. Meanwhile, plants, and that includes algae, fungi, and angiosperms, they comprise no more than 22%.
And within that animal group, the breakdown gets even more extreme. When you look at invertebrates, insects are so overwhelmingly dominant that out of every 10 animals on this entire planet, 7 of them are insects. 7 out of 10. It's a massive, massive diversification that scientists are honestly still trying to fully explain.
But here's the real catch. We haven't even found them all yet. While the IUCN says we've described a little over 1.5 million species, we know there are countless more out there. A very conservative, scientifically sound estimate by Robert May places the true global diversity at around 7 million species. That means a huge chunk of our world is literally still undiscovered.
Moving on to Section 2, the 3 levels of diversity, focusing on biological organization.
To really wrap our heads around this biological wealth, sociobiologist Edward Wilson helped popularize the concept of biodiversity across 3 fundamental levels. First up, we've got genetic diversity. This is variation within a single species. For example, did you know India has over 50,000 genetically different strains of rice? It's wild. Second, there's species diversity. A good example is how the Western Ghats have a much greater variety of amphibian species than the Eastern Ghats. And finally, ecological diversity, which zooms out to look at the broad variations across entirely different ecosystems.
Now, that ecological diversity can vary wildly depending on where you are. If you compare a country like India with a Scandinavian country like Norway, the contrast is huge. India features this vast array of deserts, rainforests, mangroves, wetlands, and coral reefs, which inherently gives it far greater ecological diversity.
Which brings us to Section 3, mapping nature's patterns.
The most well-known pattern that ecologists study is something called the latitudinal gradient. Basically, this is the rule that species diversity generally decreases as you move away from the equator and head toward the poles. Tropical environments right near the equator harbor way more species than temperate or polar areas. But why is that? Well, the tropics have remained relatively undisturbed by things like massive glaciations over millions of years. They're less seasonal, they're way more predictable, and they get a lot more solar energy, which just leads to higher overall productivity.
Another really fascinating pattern was mapped out by the great German naturalist Alexander von Humboldt. While exploring the South American jungles, he discovered the species-area relationship, which is expressed by the Humboldt equation, log S equals log C plus Z log A. Now, what does that actually mean? Essentially, he showed that species richness increases as you explore a larger area, but only up to a certain limit. And remarkably, the slope of this line, that Z value in the equation, remains amazingly consistent across widely different groups of animals and plants.
Let's transition to Section 4, the airplane ecosystem, and why these species actually matter.
You might be wondering, why does it actually matter if we have 20,000 species of ants versus, say, 15,000? Does just the sheer number of species really keep an ecosystem stable? To answer this, Stanford ecologist Paul Ehrlich came up with a brilliant, though honestly pretty terrifying analogy called the rivet popper hypothesis.
Picture an airplane. In this analogy, the airplane is our ecosystem.
All of its parts are held together by thousands of rivets, and those rivets represent all the different species. Now, if passengers start popping out a rivet here and there to take home as a souvenir, which is essentially us driving a species extinct, it might not affect the safety of the flight right away. But as more and more rivets get popped out, that plane eventually becomes dangerously weak. And, crucially, it really matters which rivets are removed. If we lose the key rivets holding the wings on, which represent the major species driving core ecosystem functions, that is a catastrophic threat to our whole flight.
This leads us directly to Section 5, the sixth mass extinction, a looming crisis. Tragically, we are currently popping those rivets out of our planetary airplane at a truly terrifying speed. If you look at the history of life through the fossil record, over the past 3 billion years, there have been 5 distinct episodes of mass extinction. But the 6th extinction that is currently in progress right now, it's unique for one deeply, deeply alarming reason.
The difference is the sheer speed. Driven entirely by human activities, current species extinction rates are estimated to be anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times faster than in pre-human times. Ecologists are warning us that if this trend keeps up, nearly half of all species on Earth might be wiped out within the next century. And this isn't just a sad loss for nature. It's a direct, literal threat to the very ecosystems that sustain our own lives.
Now for Section 6, the evil quartet, the main drivers of this loss.
Ecologists refer to the 4 major drivers behind this accelerated biodiversity loss as the evil quartet. But before we even point fingers at the culprits, we have to understand what this loss actually does on the ground. It directly leads to a severe decline in plant production, significantly lowered resistance to environmental shocks like brutal droughts, and just wildly unpredictable variability in vital ecosystem processes, things like water use and even dangerous disease cycles.
The single most dramatic and impactful cause within that evil quartet is habitat loss and fragmentation. Take tropical rainforests, for instance. They once covered more than 14% of the Earth's land surface, but today, they cover no more than 6%. The mighty Amazon rainforest, often called the lungs of the planet, is being rapidly cut and cleared just to cultivate soybeans or converted into grasslands for raising beef cattle. We are physically dismantling the very habitats these species need to survive.
So, with all this immense biological wealth sitting undocumented, and a massive fraction of species facing extinction before we even get the chance to discover them, we're left with a pretty haunting question. Are we really going to let nature's priceless biological library burn to the ground before we've even managed to catalog the titles of the books inside? It's an absolutely critical moment for conservation. Understanding these patterns is the very first step toward changing the ending of this chapter.